this time, Age of Steam. Just finished playing. Wow. I had a really good time. Which I needed after Twilight Imperium. Components, largely pretty good quality. The back of the map doesn't contain other things. Nice map board, 18xx quality. Looks very much like it with the white circles and the spaces and everything. Very different system. It's a system, like I said at the intro, that's based on the Winsome Games systems, going back to what Baltimore, Ohio, or B&O, or whatever. And I don't know if that was the first one, but that's what. Then we have what Wabash Cannonball, which turned into Chicago Express, and a number of others. I own the Chicago Express. I own Pampas Railroads. Obviously, the component quality in this is way, way better than the Winsome Games quality. But I think more to the point. So, I had almost given up on the Winsome Games design. Maybe because I'm playing solo. Maybe because I have so many games. But I'm not feeling like I'm giving up on other designs that there are. And I'm not sure whether or not I really will like them. But this one reinvigorated my interest. Chicago Express almost did. But it's still... I still didn't grasp it. Did I grasp this? I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to get ridiculed once again for my play decisions in this one and told that something or another is some kind of offer to other players for an alliance. But it didn't feel like that at all to me. I tried to look at it that way. No, there are no shares. I mean, there are shares, but you don't offer them to other people. You're not cutting deals with people. You're running your own railroad. And for that reason, I'll say that this is more of a gateway game than most of the Winsome games are. And it's not terrible. It's not particularly large or anything, but it's got a number of things to make it easier on people. First of all, the good components. Look, when you're playing with something that looks like it's a print and play, it's harder to get excited about it. Now, if you already know what a cool game it is, and you really understand that, you can put the components aside, and once you start getting used to what they're putting out, maybe it's much easier. But for me, and for people who are much more, just wanting to take a taste of the system, I think this is a lot better. Chicago Express has the good components though too. There's no question. This, you have your own railroad. It's nowhere near as subtle, for whatever that means. Which is to say that I can understand it. I think I can see what I'm supposed to do. Rulebook, so-so, but I think fairly understandable. It's short enough that whatever shortcomings it has aren't too bad. I think it requires a lot less words than it has in it, but that minimalist effort in the Winsome games usually puts even smaller rule books, and maybe they end up being just a little too difficult to grasp. This is certainly clearer than most of them. Little player aid cards, those are actually pretty nice. I'm not sure if I like the colored ones I played with better. In some ways there's something more elegant about these guys, but I knew that I was going to have trouble seeing, and I think this is a little clearer to view. So wherever the hell they got that from, Bezier Games. It looks like an online thing. I'm not sure if they're homemade. They look kind of like it, and they warp a little bit, so I guess so. But they're pretty nice for someone who's maybe first playing the game. Later on, it might be easier to deal with the more elegant solution. Little money chips. They're slippery. They're slick. I don't like them, but they serve their function fine. Train tiles, really, really high quality, and I was kind of surprised. I used almost all of them, of the straights and curves. And As with an 18XX game, as the board starts getting crowded, you start needing some of those special pieces. Well, you don't need very many of them for the length of the game that we saw, and that's the length, for 6 players. If there were more players, well, if there were less players, the length would be longer, but there would be less track tiles per turn because there's less players. So I think it probably works out about even. I think that's actually the only limiting factor on extending the game to a longer game, is there aren't enough of the special track pieces, and you would feel constrained and unable to do the things you want to do. You also, there's maybe a few other things, which is the production. We were seeing the upcoming production was just gone. It had been depleted. There wouldn't be enough new production coming in at that point. So I think you're kind of fixed at the length of the game, which is okay. It felt like about the right length for the type of game it is. I think it's shorter than most XX games, but then again, I think most of the Winsome games are. I think this is not just a good introduction for the Winsome type games, but I think it's also a good introduction for the XX, at least some of them. It gets you into a different kind of feeling. So, I mean, look, you could pick up a simplified XX pretty reasonably. I played the 1830 without too much trouble, but some gamers maybe are a little less able to make that jump. Maybe they're not used to complex games. I was already used to very complex games when I hit 1830, and it was not terribly complex. So as a step towards that, I think this fits nicely. It's a different system, but it gets you on the same train game type thought, and unlike, say, the Mayfair Crayon Rails or a Rail Baron or something, this one really is more feeling like you're running a railroad. So the Mayfair train games, you're running a train back and forth, just a single train, and same thing with Rail Baron, and it feels kind of Monopoly-ish. It doesn't link to the subject matter well. This links very, very well to the subject matter, to me. I mean, first of all, you're building and buying track. Okay, you do that in both. But the business concept of I'm opening up new trade routes, essentially, between cities by delivering one set of goods across and there's a certain amount, anybody can pick them up. It's not like I have to draw a card or bid on them or anything like that. Anybody can pick them up, and once they're set up, they've increased my potential for my whole company to make income. It's not like I get some cash that I use once or something. There's a lot less abstraction here. The thing I wanted, which this game is not, but I had some hopes that it was long before I bought it, and that I still have not seen, is sort of the Railroad Tycoon, the computer game, on a board game. And if anybody knows anything like it, please tell me about it, because that's what I want to do. I want to be investing in the business, in the industry that I'm growing. I don't want it to be this abstraction that this shows. I want to be delivering goods and setting up networks and stuff. And I think that would be a lot of fun for me. I don't know anything that does that, though, on that level. I played around with making one using strings, and I see somebody else in maybe the same time period or a bit later also came up with the idea of making railroads out of string. What I saw as nice about that was I'd take a cork board and use push pins or whatever and wrap a string or a rubber band or something like that to connect the roots. And that would allow me very, very cheap components that I didn't really have to worry about too much. I could deal with terrain, which would be right on the board. And there would just be so many cool advantages to doing it that way, because most of the track is straight, right? Where I need curves, well, I put a pin down and I curve around it. I don't make right angles. It might take multiple curves, and it might take some mechanical decisions as to what the cost of laying certain kinds of track is. And you might need a protractor for the game. but it wouldn't be the first game that I had that needed a protractor. Okay, so like I said before, this is more blatant, but it's also more brutal, I think, than most of the Winsome games that I've seen. The very fact that someone got knocked out right at the beginning of the game, wow, I mean, that is so awesome. You're not left starving, I don't think. It doesn't look too hard. It looks like there's this slow progression and then an upward curve. And just as that upward curve's beginning, the game's over. Very Euro-like in that respect, right? You know, hey, I'm just hitting my... Wow. But that's okay. I think there's a reason that kind of game is popular, and I don't mind it here. There are elements of competition and direct player interaction, which I think is very cool. So, you know, it's not just me maybe racing for the track, but I also have to race for grabbing the commodities and the bidding, auctioning for the special abilities is kind of a neat little thing. It doesn't just fall on you and you get to pick one. It doesn't just rotate around the board or whatever. There's a lot of input you have into what you're going to get next round or whatever. And I think there's a lot to that I haven't even really explored in my one little play. The low incomes feels really right in the sense that you're not making a lot of cash to reinvest into your company. It's not like an 18xx game or the Crayon Rails, where if you want, well, 18xx, if you want, you can pull a pile of cash and then do huge things with it, like buy a big train. Well, a train in 18xx is such a huge expense, and the added train power isn't really that big. You cut back on your earnings. You know, you take half earnings and you get a train. You take no earnings, you get 2 train points, right? That's really cool. I really like the way that parallels, but as your income goes up, it becomes less valuable to improve. It becomes, yeah, you have less to gain by improving your train, and you're in the sense that you're spending more to do so. And I think that's a really nice feel. The fact that your income is set and it's just an incremental growth as you expand, that feels like a good connection to the business model. Maybe a better, well, I think definitely a better one than 18xx's. What's missing is that stock side of the game. I don't think that's bad at all. You're the initial investor. You know, the model still applies. It's not worried about that side of the game, and it may actually be a more realistic game in this sense that, you know, in 18xx, 6 players control the entire RailNet, right? In this, it's the same thing. 6 players control it, but they don't own all the shares. They don't own all those companies. Sure, they control them completely. It's not like some of the other Winsome games where you can build track for other people or stuff. Analysis paralysis in this. Something that came up for me is, hey, I don't want to think too much. I don't want to count. I know I could do it. I know I could. Which means if I sat down at this game and really, really concentrated on it, I would feel almost required to make the best move, especially towards the end of the game, where I could completely calculate out, you know, what likely moves are and what I need to do. That worries me a lot, and I'm thinking this is a game where I'd really like, I think I'd prefer to play with a timer. You got a minute to do an action. You can't do it in a minute, you're playing the wrong game, right? Some people might want to do the contemplation. I mean, hell, I like playing speed Scrabble with 10 to 20 second turns. Just because I don't want to make that thinking. I don't want to make all that contemplation in the game. The fixed ending turn, there's no way around that, I think. I think you're stuck with it. You can make it shorter if you want. But it seems to me that the components and everything else are just being pushed to their limit. The way the materials come out and everything. You know, it may not... Different games may feel a little differently, but there's just no way that you can tinker with this without probably damaging the game in terms of putting that time period in. all in all, I'm really impressed with this. This is one of my happier finds, actually, and I was kind of tentative about picking it up. First of all, the Martin Wallace name, he's really, really popular, and I'm afraid of people who are really popular because I'm afraid they put out games that are liked by lots of people who have very different tastes than I do. But maybe it's not all that different. Maybe, you know, this is accessible to people who are not absolute Winsome game fanatics. But it's also, you know, got some interesting strategy in it, some interesting different feels from most of the other games that I own. It's heading in that direction, but isn't all the way there. Whether or not that makes it better or worse, for me, it's making it better because I'm not at that point. I don't want the kind of decision making, at least in my solitaire games, that's going on in those other games. Not as much. It's especially a good find after Twilight Imperium, although I think I'm going to torture myself again. I'm looking at Warrior Knights as my next possibility. Get some of these bigger boxes out of my way, and you know, we'll see how it works out. But this one, I'm going to probably rate it an 8, which is sort of the upper limit that I will give a game on one play. It may head higher. I'm really very pleased with it. It's going to be tough to go above 9 though, just because I have not yet given an 18xx game a 10. Probably because I can't make that decision. You know, do I like 1830 that much more than 1856? That much more than 1861? Is it? Whatever the Russian one is. I may be holding out for the epitome of the 18xx games, the Northern Italy one that I put an order in for a deep thought, just because I must have something that evil. On the other hand, that thing may just be unplayable, and oh well, you know, I'll find that out. But that is something I need to do. All right, well, I'm wasting upload bandwidth here, just chatting with you guys, and I don't have a lot of that right now. So cheers, and we'll see what comes up next.